Hey BookTube, hi, welcome back to my channel. So what are we talking about today? Today I'm going to be talking about one of the most incredible nonfiction books that I've read in a while, maybe in the last year. That is really high praise for me, but I do think that this is one of the most important nonfiction books published, and I'll get into that, and one of the most unique documents I have ever encountered. So what book am I talking about? I'm talking about John Hersey's Hiroshima. So let's first I'm going to talk about three separate things. The first is this book, this item, what it is, which is really fascinating, by the way. Then I'm going to talk about the plot summary and the way that works. No spoilers or anything, but just the plot and the general premise and idea of this book. And then I'll talk about the comparison between the television show Chernobyl and whether you've watched the show, whether you should also read the book about an atomic bomb attack, but as a weapon for war and not an accident. What is this? I found out about this document, this book, from Steve Donahue, but the background of the book is really, really fascinating. So this is broken into 5 chapters. 4 of the chapters were originally articles for the New Yorker, and actually you can still access all 4 articles. I found that you can still access them on the New Yorker's website, so I will leave that linked down below. But originally what the New Yorker was going to do was in 4 separate issues, they were going to run an article each. But instead what they decided to do was bind it up in 1 issue, and so all 4 articles ran at one time. And it was one of the first reportings of the effects and the experience of the Japanese who had lived through the attack, the atomic bomb attack on Hiroshima, which is incredibly sad and difficult to talk about in a way. So these were originally articles, again, for the New Yorker, and then 2 months later, the publishing house Knopf decided to bind this up and put it as a book out there, and it has never been out of print since. I think there was a lot of comments in my video talking about it, my TBR video. A lot of people said they had read it, and I had the impression that they had read it in high school. Let me know if you've actually read this in high school and what you thought of it back then. There is a chapter 5. The first 4 chapters are 90 pages, and that was the original. And then 40 years later, Hershey wrote I don't know if it's Hershey or Hersey, but so I'm sorry if I go back and forth because I don't catch myself sometimes. But 40 years later, he wrote an addendum, a catch-up, an afterword of the individuals that were featured in this book. So let's talk about the plot or the structure. The structure is the most interesting thing about this book, I think. Well, the contents of it and the structure. So let's just talk quickly about the structure. Hershey was sent to Japan to report on the experience of the atomic bomb being dropped in Japan, and on Hiroshima in particular. So what he did, and he wanted to, as this reporting assignment, there was supposed to be a lot of eyewitness accounts, and he was supposed to, really get like a real visceral account of like what happened. Always interrupted, right? So Hersey, what he does is that he decides to focus on 6 individual survivors. It says right away that they were survivors of this nuclear attack, and so he decides to focus in on them. And I actually was immediately reminded of this idea of a fugue in music. If you don't know what a fugue is, actually, if you do know what a fugue is, check my metaphor and tell me if I'm wrong down below, because it's been a while since I thought about fugues. But if you don't know what a fugue is, what it is that it is a melody, it's a piece of music. And what the idea is that it takes one single melody. So let's say the melody is bum 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 ba da 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 dum. So let's say that's your melody. It will take that melody and riff on it. It will elongate it. There will be parts that are elongated. There will be parts that will be shortened. And what it does is that it starts off with one individual melody, and then the other melodies come in, but they're always playing and riffing on that same theme, that same original melody, whether it be sped up, slowed down, inverted, a counterpoint too. And then somehow, like a puzzle, that's why the fugue is so interesting to me, like a puzzle, these individual melodies work together in harmony to present the listener or the player with a very complex piece of music. And the whole kind of trick or fun in it, if you're studying this kind of thing, is to identify the amount of times this melody has been used and all the different ways the composer can use a single melody and really riff on that theme. And sometimes it's just like a part of the melody, and then that gets played and turned around and all upside down and everything. So in a very fugue-like way, Hersey is able to take these 6 individual stories and they create an interwoven narrative so that the reader has a more bird's eye or omniscient view of the night that the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And the 6 individuals are just normal, like normal people. They're no one special. They're 6 survivors of this night, which is actually really spectacular considering how many people died because of the atomic bomb that the United States dropped on Hiroshima and the destruction that followed thereafter. So what happens is that, like a fugue, where each melody is introduced individually, we get each individual that is introduced on their own, and it starts with the night that the bomb was dropped. And where they were, not the night, the day the bomb was dropped, and where they were, and what they saw, and then the moments thereafter. So that's the opening, is you get these 6 perspectives. Again, written in third person, so it's very like, again, you're like following the individual, but then you somehow get this broader perspective because you're following so many of the night that happened. And then really interestingly, I wasn't sure if Hersey was going to somehow get these individuals to interact, like if that actually happened, because he's reporting on a real event, so he can't just make one character or one individual bump into another character or individual. What he does is that these people, because he focuses in on a very specific park and on a very specific hospital, these people do end up bumping into one another and knowing one another. So it really, really works. It feels like the experience that I had, it felt like I was there and that I was running along the same streets that these individuals ran along, seeing the destruction and seeing what was going on in this very like slim part of Hiroshima. And I thought that was a really effective way to tell a bigger, broader story about this nuclear weapon of war that the Japanese didn't know anything about. The first 4 chapters were the original articles, and then there is a afterword. So these 6 individuals, 40 years later, as he wrote, he goes back and Hersey is able to report on the lives of these individuals and how they were ultimately affected by a huge disaster like the destruction of their city through a nuclear weapon of war. And that's really interesting. So near the end, you get a little bit more about politics and the individuals' lives, and it feels less of a concert, less of a fugue working together to tell one story, and more about the individual and how that individual decided to spend their days for the next 40 years at least. So with Chernobyl, the television show, I'll put up a picture somewhere. With the show, you're following scientists. You're following people who understand what a nuclear disaster is and the effects that it will have on the body. And in that show, you get a lot more of like a techie perspective, done very, very well, by the way. Highly recommend the show Chernobyl. If you've never watched it, go watch it because it's amazing. I watched it through HBO, and because you're following these scientists, you really get this sense of the doom and the destruction and the horrifying reality of what it would be like to live through a nuclear disaster. In Hiroshima, on the other hand, you don't get that experience because Hersey is reporting on individual witnesses, survivors of this horrible attack. The individual, like, most of us, the atomic bomb was new. It had never been used as a weapon of war before. So the individuals that survived this night didn't know what was going on as it was going on. So there are these theories that are born. They are wondering, was there a fire that started but there's no fire? Why is it raining these huge droplets of rain? Why is it black outside? what is up with all of these burns and yet there is no fire to spot? And that confusion, and that, I don't want to say, in a very sad way, it was very much a discovery of what the radiation can do to one's body while you're living through an attack where radiation is all around you. And that is how this book felt. You feel like you're right in the confusion and you really don't know what's going on. And so the way you're discovering the effects of the atomic bomb is through what these eyewitness accounts saw and what they saw on the streets and of their town, in the park, and so on and so forth. And so it feels very different. You're going to get a lot less of a science-y approach, a doctory approach with this book, Hiroshima, and you're going to get more of the sort of layman's individual experience of what it was like to live through and the atomic bomb. So that was really, really interesting. I would say that, like, if you were more interested in like a science-y perspective, and I haven't read a lot about, you know, nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons of war or nuclear power plants that have gone wrong. I have not read a ton about that. So I can say, if you want a more science-y approach, the show Chernobyl would definitely be the way to go. But if you're interested in like what it would be like to be an individual in Japan to live through an attack like this, this is your book. I will say, at the end of the day, it was fascinating read. I really, really appreciated that Hersey didn't emotionally manipulate me in the story. He is a reporter through and through. He may be really creative with his writing techniques, using that sort of fiction-y type techniques with these interwoven narratives to tell a singular story. That's something you would normally see in fiction. So structurally, stylistically, he does take some liberties. But when it comes down to like the emotion, there was plenty of room and opportunity for Hersey to emotionally manipulate me, where I would feel like punched in the gut or really torn apart. I didn't feel that way. I felt like he was telling me what happened, and it was up to me to sort of react. That if something really pulled at me, it was because I was the one that felt it, and not because he was like tugging at my heartstrings because of it, or because the fact of it is like so many people lost their lives in a really horrific way, and that is in essence incredibly sad. But yeah, he doesn't make a huge statement about like humanity, or, you know, try and build up a character only to see them pass away in a few moments later. So I really, really appreciated Hersey's writing in that way. And I also think like he's a master at his craft. I've only read this by him, but I can only imagine that the rest of his reporting, which he had a long career doing, was amazing, because the creativity, the sort of straightforwardness, but yet the way he takes liberties, again, with the structure and the way that he unfolds the story is very, very, very good. So, for a nonfiction book, if you're a nonfiction reader, what are you waiting for? Read this. Like, just read it. It's so good. If you're not a nonfiction reader and you're really just interested in getting into nonfiction, a great place to start. And if you are like, nonfiction is not my jam, I will never read it, get it away from me, I would say try it, because it does have a lot of elements stylistically that echo fiction. And so you may really, really enjoy this. This is like the perfect nonfiction book for a fiction reader. That's what I would say. Okay, well, that's it for me. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye, guys.